Robert E. Lee's role in the Civil War, his leadership, and his controversial legacy are still debated today. And here's why his story still matters. I'm Matt Hasquin. I'm a social studies teacher, and I always tell my kids there's certain things you should know by being alive. Now, Robert E. Lee is one of the most complex and significant figures in American history. He gets credit for being a brilliant military strategist, and he's famously known as the commander of the Confederate Army during the Civil War. But his story extends beyond the war, as it involves his earlier years of military service and his controversial decisions regarding the defense of slavery. He was born on January 19th of 1807 in Stratford Hall, Virginia, and he came from a distinguished family. His father was Henry Lighthorse Harry Lee, and he was a celebrated Revolutionary War hero. And growing up, Lee was exposed to the ideals of liberty and honor, but his life was also marked by financial hardship because his father faced financial ruin due to some bad economic decisions, and he ended up leaving the country. But Robert E. Lee went on to grow up, and he succeeded academically, and he graduated second in his class at West Point in 1829. To his credit, he received 0 demerits during his time there. He went on to serve in the U.S. Army. His military service during the Mexican-American War helped solidify his reputation as one of the U.S. Army's most capable officers. But his story as a national figure began to take shape in a different context, and that was the abolitionist movement. In 1859, Lee played a crucial role in quelling one of the most dramatic moments in the fight against slavery, and that was the raid on Harper's Ferry led by John Brown. Brown was an abolitionist, and he attempted to seize the federal arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, which is now in West Virginia, with the aim of inciting a slave revolt. And his raid was quickly suppressed by U.S. forces, but it became a flashpoint for the national debate over slavery. At the time, Lee was stationed as a colonel in the U.S. Army, and he was tasked with leading the federal troops that apprehended Brown and his followers. Brown was captured, tried for treason, and executed. Lee's role in the raid is significant because it demonstrated his loyalty to the federal government and the Union, even though his allegiance would later shift when Virginia would secede from the Union. The raid at Harper's Ferry only intensified the sectional divide between the North and the South, fueling tensions that would ultimately lead to the Civil War. And when the war did break out in 1861, Lee faced a profound personal dilemma. Though a loyal officer to the U.S. Army, his loyalty to his home state of Virginia proved to be more important to him than his duty to the Union. When Virginia seceded from the Union, Lee resigned from the U.S. Army and joined the Confederate Army. His decision to fight for the Confederacy was deeply controversial, especially given that his personal, he at times seems to be personally opposed to slavery, but he considered himself a man of principle, and he believed he could not fight against his home state. Lee's choice to side with the South, which was defending slavery, has been the subject of some pretty intense debate. Some argue that Lee fought out of a sense of duty and loyalty to Virginia, while others contend that his decision cannot be separated from the reality of the Confederates' cause, and that was preserving the institution of slavery, of which Lee was a slave owner. Once in charge of the Confederate Army, Lee's military prowess quickly became apparent. He was a skilled tactician, and he was able to turn the tide of battles even when the Confederate forces were outnumbered. His victories at the Second Battle of Bull Run, the Battle of Fredericksburg, and the Battle of Chancellorsville made him one of the most respected military leaders of his time. However, Lee's confidence in his abilities and his belief in Southern resilience led to some overconfident decisions, notably his ill-fated invasion of the North, which culminated in the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863. The battle was a devastating loss for the Confederacy, and it marked the turning point of the Civil War. Lee's decision to press the attack at Gettysburg especially the disastrous decision of Pickett's charge cost him valuable resources and manpower that the South could not afford to lose. By 1865, the war was all but over. The Union forces under General Ulysses S. Grant had the Confederacy surrounded, and Lee's Army of Northern Virginia was losing ground fast. On April 9th of 1865, with his forces battered and defeated, Lee met Grant at Appomattox Courthouse to surrender. The terms of the surrender offered by Grant were generous. Lee's troops would be allowed to return home with their horses and would not be prosecuted for treason. Lee's dignified surrender was a moment of humility, but it also marked the end of the Confederacy and the beginning of the arduous process of rebuilding the nation through Reconstruction. After the war, Lee became the symbol of the Lost Cause movement, a narrative promoted by many Southerners to reframe the Confederacy's defeat as a noble struggle rather than a defense of slavery. Lee himself did not wholly align with the Lost Cause ideology, although his image as a leader of the Confederacy made him a central figure within it. After the war, Lee became the president of Washington College, which is now known as Washington and Lee University, which is located in Lexington, Virginia, where he worked to promote education and reconciliation. But Lee's legacy has been deeply controversial. For many, he represents the defense of slavery and the old Southern way of life. Now, his military brilliance as a tactician is undeniable, but his role in defending a system of racial oppression complicates his legacy. Statues and monuments to Lee became symbols of Southern pride, but in recent years they've also become targets of protest and calls for removal, especially as the United States confronts its history of racism and inequality. Today, Robert E. Lee remains a polarizing figure. To some, he represents the tragic heroism of the South and the valor of the Confederate cause, but for others, he's a symbol of resistance to the rights of African Americans and the fight to preserve slavery. And the debate surrounding Lee's legacy is part of a larger conversation about the way we remember and interpret the Civil War, and whether monuments to figures like Lee should be seen as part of a historical heritage or as symbols of oppression. Robert E. Lee's legacy is a key part of understanding the complexities of American history, particularly in the context of the Civil War and slavery. Lee was not just a military leader. He was a symbol of the Confederacy and its defense of slavery. His decisions, particularly to fight for the South, played a crucial role in shaping the course of the war and the future of the United States. Understanding Lee's story is essential to understanding the broader narrative of the Civil War, the fight for freedom, and also the lasting impact of slavery on American society. The debate surrounding Lee's legacy reminds us that history is not always simple. It's shaped by context, perspective, and the lessons we choose to make from it. I think his legacy is defined by his military genius and his role in the Confederate Army, but it's also inseparable from the cause he fought for, which was the preservation of slavery. The questions surrounding his actions and his legacy continue to shape our understanding of the Civil War and the long struggle for equality in the United States. Like, comment, follow, question, share for more things that you should know by being alive. Because understanding figures like Robert E. Lee, well, it helps us confront the complexities of American history and its ongoing impact. Thank you for watching.